call the meeting to order. It's nice to be back in person again. A little bit. Everybody's here, Bill. We need a motion to adopt our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
We also need the approval of minutes from February 5th board meeting. If you had a chance to go through those, if you noticed anything that we needed to change or...
Good to me, I move approval.
Second.
And moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. And so this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases and other adjudicative proceedings. Welcome. We now finally get to meet or see you in face-to-face and know everybody else who's here. So did you have anything you'd like to say?
No, I'm just glad to be here in person. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. So we'll move on to the Executive Director's report.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, so behind tab 3 in your packet, you'll find the Executive Director's report, and the first item there is the 2021 legislative summary. So it was a pretty good session for TRS, I would say, in most respects. Our housekeeping bill, of course, passed the legislature. Really, the two biggest changes that were included in that bill, that was the bill that was at our own request, was to make it clear that cash in lieu of a benefit is not reportable if the member has the option to take either the benefit or the cash. If they do a conversion of benefit to cash, that's fine, but if they have the option, and that goes back to the Mark Payne matter we had last summer, and it sort of closes that loophole. And then the second biggest big item in that housekeeping bill was just updating our required minimum distribution language to 72, which is the new IRS requirement.
Right.
And so Representative Bartolio from Clancy actually carried that bill on our behalf and it passed the legislature. Our university system supplemental contribution bill was tabled in the first committee and no further action was ever taken on that, so that died. The only other bill that really passed that is going to have an impact on TRS is House Joint Resolution 8, which is supposed to be a sort of a deep dive on all public pensions in Montana. You know, there's a joint committee will convene and look at some of the things that I listed here. They're supposed to review governance of the systems, examine legislative education, oversight and goals, and develop recommendations for a long-term strategic approach to setting contribution rates that will ensure the financial strength and resilience of the systems. So on the surface, you know, if that's really what the committee wants to achieve, I think, you know, obviously we want to take part in that and be a party at the table, make sure they understand exactly where things stand now, make sure they understand what we've already done or looked at in the past as much as possible in the beginning. One other thing that it's not a legislation concern at all, but of note at least, is their longtime staff member for Legislative Services Division, Sherry Skerr, has announced that she's going to be retiring in May. And one thing about Sherry is she had been involved in a lot of prior deep dives and pension studies, and so she had a lot of institutional knowledge about what the legislature's already looked into. You know, she would have worked on and primarily drafted a lot of those reports from 2009, 2011, all the way through. So that'll potentially, you know, cause a few new challenges in that whoever they replace her with is not going to have that. It's just not possible to have that institutional knowledge. So we will have to make sure that we bring those items to light, you know, as they come up and say, you know, look, we've already done a study like this, you know, not saying you can't do it again, but so So anyway, she announced her retirement.
Sherry's the one who comes.
She does, yeah, she'll come in
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yep, all right.
You
She's
bet.
been great.
She
She has done a really good job.
asked good questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Would she be able to have any part before her retirement in a potential replacement for herself?
You know, I'm not sure,
Okay.
you know, whether she would or not. And I don't know
Yeah.
really what they're looking at. If they're looking to take someone internal and move them on primarily pensions, or if they'll hire somebody brand new for pensions.
May I ask, as far as the university system supplemental contribution, every time those bills come up, they get killed immediately. Has anybody got any brilliant ideas about how to get leverage in the next legislative session to maybe make that more of an important point?
I honestly, I do not. I mean,
Yeah.
so that rate, that 13.9 is gonna, you get 2 more years down the road, it's gonna be closer to 16%.
Yeah.
It's harder and harder each year for them to actually make up the whole amount. Yeah, I don't.
Somehow the way that's being framed in committee, I mean, the political perspective on that has to be that nobody wants to raise those supplemental rates to the university system, because I think that would be bad for them politically, apparently, right?
Right, I mean.
I'd rather spend the money on something else.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's, one of the things that comes up is, you know, they'll ask, well, how are they going to pay for this? And it has to come out of their existing budget. It's not like there's a new appropriation that goes along with this
Right.
to the university system. So then the argument from the university system side is, well, that's less money we can do other things with.
Mm.
And you know, they don't come in, and they don't even come in and testify on it, on the record. You know,
Gone on for so
Right.
long.
It's a high degree of confidence.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
Well, on one hand, it's a reminder to everybody how these things turn out when you don't resolve them,
Yes.
and potential changes in the future could end up the same way.
Mhm.
So then the next one, so when we jump into the other legislation that could have affected TRS, House Bill 323 was a bill by Representative Moore. And that bill, so I guess this one, and then Senate Bill 387. Those two are both, you know, potential things that may get kicked around over the interim. Moore's bill would have taken and in statute made it clear that whatever our existing liability was as of July 1, we were going to be doing that over a closed period. And then any new liability as a result of assumption changes or actuarial losses related to investments, whatever they might be, would have to be amortized over a layered 10-year amortization period. So those kinds of ideas may come up, and really the big issue with that was, yeah, it sounds great from our perspective, we would be fully funded for sure in 29 years, right? But the employer contribution rate would swing dramatically from one year to the next under that type of scenario. So that bill was tabled. It didn't get out of the first committee. Senate Bill 387 was a bill by Senator Hogan, and you know, it would have created a cash balance tier of membership, so it would have been a whole brand new tier of membership. We did the actuarial analysis on it, and it actually, the normal cost for this new tier of membership was actually going to be more expensive than the normal cost for our tier 2 members. So it actually increased the liabilities of the system, and it was tabled in committee as well.
This was the second time for that bill, right?
It was
Basically,
basically a copy of the Valley bill
Valley,
from
yeah.
2011, right, yes. So both of those died. Those would have been, you know, significant system changes to the, you know, for us as far as the type of benefit and how we fund our liabilities that TRS provides. The next couple were House Bill 683, which was distribute recreational marijuana revenue to unfunded pension liability. I'm sure you all were following along. There was, you know, quite a bit of angst about what the legislature was thinking about doing with that marijuana money based on versus the initiative that actually passed. In the end, no money ended up going to either Para Systems or TRS. So that was eventually died in committee as well. And then last would, I guess I kind of jumped around a little bit, but last is Senate Bill 188, which is the revised retiree return to work provisions under 19-20-732. This was Senator Lang trying to adjust the provision we have where in emergency situations, an employer can hire a retired member with no limit on the amount they can earn. They can currently do that for 3 years in their lifetime, and superintendents are currently excluded under the law. His bill would have made it for up to 5 years during a lifetime for a teacher or specialist, and it would have added back superintendents. We opposed that bill, and it ended up being tabled in committee as well. So that's the first time we actually were able to stop that one in the last several sessions. They've been adjusting it a little bit here and there, and Senator Lang specifically the last few sessions. So we were able to get that one stopped dead in its tracks in the second house.
What area does he live in?
Malta.
Malta,
Yep, Malta. Yep. So are there any questions on any of the legislation?
Were you surprised there weren't any bills that were more aggressively, I guess, against what we're trying to do here, or did it seem like a normal session?
No, it seemed fairly normal. You know, honestly, since 13, this is the first session where we've had sort of, because these two bills that failed would have been pretty significant changes. In 15, 17, and 19, there weren't any of these bills that even were actually introduced. There are always sort of placeholders out there, but we haven't had to stand up and flat out oppose one of those bills since 13, really.
I don't know, for what it's worth, I had a conversation with Diane a few days ago, and she said, in her opinion, the legislative session was really awful. And she said she thinks there's a few legislators that are gearing up for a push in the next session to try to fight pension systems across the board. So we didn't get any more specifics about that, but she's promised to send me some information. So.
Okay, so seeing no questions, I'll move on to the operations update. So beginning on Monday, April 19th, the TRS building reopened to the public. So depending on what time you got here this morning, if you came in after 8 o'clock, that the north entrance is open, and it's open from 8 to 4 for the time being. It will eventually be 8 to 5 like it always was, but it's 8 to 4 for now. And all staff are coming in for at least a portion of the day in the office so that we have 100% coverage in each department for any walk-in traffic that comes in. And it's the time of year where we start to see a lot more walk-in traffic. People are passing through on that forms they want to drop off, or they want somebody to double check, make sure their retirement application is filled out appropriately. So we are able to handle that at this point in time. That seems to be going well. We've been doing that now for several weeks, and we're able to serve our customers, which is our TRS members. We are still following all the COVID-19 protocols, such as the use of face masks for all the common areas. Obviously, we're all sitting here with masks on in the board meeting. And anytime there's 2 or more people in a room, for the most part, they should be wearing their masks. So that seems to all be working fine for us up to this point. Jared, are there any questions about operations of TRS? I haven't obviously seen anything yet. I've heard rumors that at some point here in the next few weeks, the governor may come out with some new directives related to the face masks for state employees, as well as returning to work. But currently, there's no guidance out, so we're still operating under all the existing protocols.
Is there any other thing from the public comment? All right, then we will move on to administrative business, which, Jeff, you're on first.
All right, our last Board of Investment meeting was April 20th, and we were partially present and partially on Zoom still, which accommodates people in their level of comfort. I still prefer the face-to-face so I can see everybody, at least have a little interaction, but they're getting a little bit more back to normal. It was a one-day meeting. We looked at continuation of operation plan. So that's, if some disaster, natural disaster takes place, how do they continue to deal with the money and invest and have access to it? In the past, one of the important components of that was having an off-site facility where at least someone could be and access systems. Turns out that it was basically a basement broom closet, essentially. No windows, one person could be in there. I mean, they could access all the systems that they needed to. It made sense. But with COVID, all employees that need to be in the investments have laptops that have been purchased through the board. They still have to have the chips, all the security to be able to get into the system. And so even if there was a natural disaster, nobody really needs to be on site anymore. So one of the updates was to actually remove that physical location. Unnecessary. We've shown for the last 16 months that you can operate without being physically present. So a few other minor updates to that, but that was one of the items that we looked at. One of the other big functions of the Board of Investments is loans in state for businesses. And those come out of the trust funds. Some of them actually are legislated funds that they put money into annually. One of the loans we looked at this time, just as an example, in Gardner, if you've been through there in the last 4 or 5 years, there's lots of people and not a lot of space. One of the new additions there is a large travel center that is just north of town. It's a Sinclair, and right out of the lava cliff there. They've worked through that, leveled it out, have water drainage, and we funded that as an in-state loan through individuals who live in Gardner and are involved in a number of different processes, but that was just a good example of some of the work that the money from the state does out of these trust funds. During the board meeting this time, we looked a little bit more in depth at international equities, and our consultant RBK did an outlook for international equities, and compared to a year ago, depending on the type of specific equity, whether it's debt or emerging markets, they've decreased their outlook anywhere from 0.25 to 0.5% for the coming year. They seem to think some things, at least internationally for sure, are going to cool down a bit. You can see from the data that you have in your packet that the first 3 months of this year have been great. May not continue. One of the reasons why we continue to do well, you'll notice on the first page there that we're heavy in our distribution to domestic equities, over 31% still in domestic equities, and international is just over 18%, private investments another almost 14%. So a good majority of the investments have been high yield in at least the short term. You can see also that there, for a teacher's retirement system, the amount in our plan is $4.8 billion. Continues to increase. For perspective, there, with all the trust funds as well as PERS, there's over $23 billion now under investment for the board. And a year ago, maybe 14 months, that was about 19 billion. So, it's been going great guns for a while.
Yeah.
Sure wish we could count on that again, but, who knows? And importantly, you can see that the, since inception, return for TRS is almost 8% now, 7.99, which is fantastic. Hopefully that continues. We won't have to worry about any of the bills that may or may not come in the future, as well as the financial study. So looking good at this point.
Jeff, I have two questions. The loans that you mentioned, I assume they're under the category of private investments?
They're actually out of the trust fund. They aren't
They're not-
TRS funds at all,
Okay,
or PERS for that matter.
Okay.
It's just another function of the board.
I see.
And it's taking state revenue and investing it back in the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question has to do with insurance. I started thinking about this last month. And Daniel and I, we put together a private account for a client with a custodial firm, and SIPC protects that against the insolvency of the custodial firm, not the market value of the investments, up to $10 million. But obviously, this system is so much bigger, I'm sure they can't spread the accounts out to the point where you've got a different custodian for every $10 million. So do you know anything about how that is insured against, or is it insured against the insolvency of the custodial firms?
I would assume the custodial bank that we use is State Street.
Okay.
Currently out for bid, and we'll see if it continues to be State Street, but it's one of the few that do that. And I understand there's some sort of insurance, if you will, against that, for the bank itself.
The good news is those custodial firms are highly unlikely to go out of business because they don't take any risk in the market themselves.
No, it's
They're
just
just
pass-through.
making fees. So, it's a long shot. But if there was a serious issue in the banking system, I'm curious if that SIPC insurance applies.
I don't know for sure, but I'll certainly ask.
Okay.
Any other
Jeff, I
questions?
have one question to it. I was just looking at the one-year numbers, our results relative to the custom benchmark. It looks like it's all centered in the private investments in real estate. There was pretty good divergence there. Did you guys talk about, I'm guessing maybe it's because we're a little bit lower risk than the benchmark, but I'm not sure why we have underperformed so much on the one-year mark.
Part of the problem with some of those is, as it's been explained to me, is that there is no one specific benchmark that really matches what we do in those investments. And also there's lag between what we get and what this benchmark shows, especially in rental property for sure. So, yeah, picking the benchmarks, we've changed those a few times, and it never really seems to exactly follow. And I think specifically the ones you're looking at in the last month or two, they've actually changed, and that might be part of the divergence as well.
Well, I would suspect we don't probably reprice everything as often as they do. So if we're
Right.
looking at 1 year, that was in the depth of the bear market. So for that benchmark to have recovered 91%, it means it was down significantly further probably than what we were.
Right,
That's my
yeah.
guess.
Do either one of you happen to know what institutional firm puts that benchmark together?
You know, I could look back in my notes that I don't have with me, but there are so many different ones
Yeah.
that they use. I'd have to be you guys and do this every day to remember which one of those benchmarks it really was.
Just curious.
But I can surely find out.
Yeah,
It's in my office, so.
Not that important.
Okay.
It looks odd to be off by 11% from the benchmark on the 1 year.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jeff?
We probably had new game stuff.
Bitcoin?
Yeah. No, then our performance would be higher.
All right.
Nolan, would you like to do our financial statements, budget report?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So these, this first page 21 here is the balance sheet as of March 31st. I think these numbers come out of our Sabre system. They lag some of these numbers that you see, that Member Greenfield just, presented. So that's why you see some of the numbers don't exactly match what he's showing, but it just has to do with how the board enters that information into the Sabre's system. So, but you can see our, even according to the numbers that have been entered into the accounting system, our total investments are up about $600 million from this point last year, which we know was about the lowest point of 2020. So, but that's a really good sign for all the reasons that Member Greenfield just went over. And there's really not a whole lot that jumps out at me on the balance sheet other than that, large increase in our total investments. We do have the zeros, just like we spoke about last board meeting, our building sale, so that we no longer have the land and buildings there in those on the balance sheet. And other than that, everything else is pretty much in line with where we would expect to see it with our investment revenue. Does anyone have any questions on the balance sheet itself?
No, I just point out that year-to-date income loss, how different that is.
Yeah.
Yes.
What a nice sign.
Yeah, so you can see that on page 22 a little better than, it looks like last year at this point we were looking at about an $85 million deficit there in the revenue over expenses, and this year we're, obviously in the black, about 536 million. So, and most of that, has to do with the investment revenue, of course, but then we also have that miscellaneous revenue there. The sale of the building is shown in the miscellaneous revenue. We do expect, you might not see it yet on this fund balance statement, but we expect withdrawals to increase, over the next year. We have a new process where we started sending out our dormant letters to lots of members, and we did a big member search and found a lot of them. So, but that's a good thing. Get those term non-vested members, off our books and get them their funds back. So, but it's already up from last year, and we expect that number to go up a little bit, by the end of the year. And then just the investment revenue by source on page 23, you can see the vast majority of it just has to do with the appreciation of our assets, of our investments. So, any questions on any of the financial information as of March 31st? Moving on to the operating budget status report. You see, we're looking, we project a surplus of over $200,000, and the vast majority of that has to do with the savings that we realized from not doing the CMOD project that I'm sure John will speak about soon, John Noble. And the travel, we obviously have a surplus in travel and rent, and those just have to do with, we projected that we may need the budget for the old building, paying that rent cost for the whole year, and since we sold the building, we'll have a surplus there. And then just with COVID, there's been a lot less travel. So So that's the majority of all the surplus is coming from those three categories. And does anyone have any questions or comments about the budget status? The next two pages are just kind of informational. The contracted services are our largest budget category, and everything, you know, you can see we've about 75% of the fiscal year complete, and we've spent about 71% of that budget, so things seem to be pretty in line. And delinquent agencies, there are none as of April. You know, everyone has their delinquent, or their reports in on time, so.
So we haven't seen any delinquencies from the school districts in quite a while now, and there used to be 5 or 6 all the time.
Right.
Why the change, do you think?
You know, I think we just have a little better process. I run that delinquent agency report, which I always have, but instead of, I actually send out an email to all the delinquent agencies right away. So we always do have people that are late. It's just that it just so happens by the time the board meeting, or by the time I get to these reports, they're not so late that they end up on the report. So there might be 3 or 4 days late instead of 2 weeks late, you know, so they don't end up on this delinquent agency report. So, and even though folks that are 3 or 4 days late, those employers are we have a lot less of that than we ever used to, and I think we have a lot better communication of, you know, with the employers.
Proactive discussions.
Exactly, yeah, I think we just, you know, we get that, they all know that, you know, they have to have those reports in by the 15th of the following month, and I think that's been well communicated, and so I think that plays a role for sure, so. Do you want me to stay for the next piece? In case there's...
So that's, I guess, Madam Chair, if I may, so what's next on the agenda is the budget committee report from Member Chamberlain and Member Charles. And we can either then go through the budget request at that time, or they can give their report, and then when we get to the action item, before you take action, you could have Nolan go through, you know, he's not gonna go every single line, but go through the budget request in a little more detail for the rest of the board. And so it's your preference, whatever you prefer.
Do it right now.
Stick with it.
Yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah.
That's all right with everyone?
So then, I guess the second question, piece of that is, do you want the report from the committee first, or do you want Nolan to go ahead and present and then have the committee give their recommendation?
Let's go through that, but that would probably make more sense to us.
Yeah. So I won't spend, like Sean said, I won't spend, you know, time going through every single line. This first section is your personal services. Kind of the way this spreadsheet is set up is, you know, you have your approved budget from last fiscal year 21. We have our expenses that have hit those budget categories through March 31st of 20, so about 3/4 of the fiscal year. And then we have our request, and then just the percent change. And the percent change is just on kind of the roll-up categories of the major expense categories. So we didn't do it on every single individual account code, if you will. So you can see our full-time employees, we're requesting one more, that additional position that's in red at the bottom there. So as a start date of August of 2021, so most of the fiscal year, but not all of it. So that will increase our total personal services by about 5.75%. And that's the majority of that increase. It has to do with that new position, that new internal auditor position, and then obviously any health insurance or other benefits that are associated with that. You know, the majority of that increase comes from that request for a new position. And moving on, unless there's questions, moving on to contracted services. These are, especially this first category is one of our largest expenditure categories. All of our actuarial services fall into the consulting and professional services, and along with several other miscellaneous items, but these are all set in our contract that we sign with Kavanaugh McDonald, except for a few of the expenses in there that we're just projecting in case we need some, for like the HJ8 pension study and things. But overall, this expense category, the contracted services, most of them are set, even though it's our largest expense category, they're set by contracts, or they're fixed fees that come from the Department of Administration. They have a rate setting that goes through the legislature, and we really don't have a lot of say in what those rates end up being, but they are thoroughly analyzed, and so what we end up with is an increase of 4% in that category. All these ones in orange, if you have any specific questions about those, John Noble helps me set those requests, and they're based on usage rates of all of our IT services that we get charged through the state ITSD. So a 4% increase in the total contracted services. Supplies and materials actually had a large decrease in our request, and again, that had to do with, if you look at computer software, we had that CMOD conversion last fiscal year that we had requested for $160,000. We didn't actually end up spending it, so that's why we have the surplus that we just went over, and just this year it's down 70%, the overall budget category. So unless anyone has anything that jumps out at them on that. Communications, just a small decrease in communications for what we're requesting. Most of it, I suppose, comes from the postage and mailing. We've just decreased that by $10,000, and I think that's just efficiency and realizing that we think we can get all the information out to our members for a little less money this year. Travel, we've left it exactly the same because we don't have any idea of how much things are going to open up this next year, but we're hoping that we can at least send everyone to all of the workshops or conferences that they need to go to if they are open to go to. So in the case that doesn't happen, we just see a surplus in that category again. And the rent obviously went down. Overall, it went down because of the old, the old building, the sale of the old building. We don't have any of that rent expense. But our rent on this current building did see a pretty significant increase to $149,000 for this year. But overall, without the old building, we have a decrease of 15% in that category. So these are just our software contracts. So most of them are pretty small dollar amounts for this next budget category. But they are things that we need, and the largest ones even are not significant expenses, but if you have any questions about any of those, feel free. We do have an increase in that category, but overall $26,000 for the whole category. So
you know, when you see 102%, you're like, whoa, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah, it just went from 13,000 to 26,000, but it just has to do with some, you know, regular maintenance contracts that we have, and if you have questions about those specific contracts, you know, John or myself should be able to answer those, so.
Could you just mention quickly, like Twilio, what do they do, and Island Perceptive?
So Twilio
I'm
is,
gonna defer to you.
yeah, so Twilio is the provider we're using for two-factor authentication.
Oh.
So we recently stood up two-factor authentication on the MyTRS portal. And the reason for that is we're not all that far away. You know, in the next 8 months, we should have rolled out online withdrawals, which are online member transactions.
Good.
And what was the second one you asked about?
Oh, you know, I was just curious about
Island
some of these other
Perceptive
ones.
is
Yeah.
our content management system. So one of the things that Nolan has mentioned a couple different times as we went through this is that we didn't spend that $160,000 in software for the CMOD. And the reason for that was that was a two-part thing. We were going to move from Perceptive, which we are on now, and we were going to move back to FileNet, IBM FileNet, and then take on a content management system that would replace Report Manager. And actually, John did some analysis on all of that. And we got quite a ways down the road to where we should have already been doing that, but ITSD wasn't ready for us to get that, to do it. And by the time it got to the point where we could start moving, John had sort of worked with some other agencies that decided to stay with Perceptive, number one, so we didn't have any changes to our business processes. And then number two, John and his staff have been doing a homegrown solution for converting Report Manager to something that automatically goes into Perceptive and is viewable through Perceptive, and saving us quite a bit of money. John, do you have anything you want to add to that? I mean, that's kind of a summary.
No, that's perfect, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your efforts.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on to the last category, I guess, here, the other expenses. There's really nothing that jumps out. The biggest increase are in these fixed costs that, again, we just really don't have a whole lot to say. We do need one more parking space, you know, for the new, for the new position. So those are just the small increases there.
Isn't the employee health important? Park farther away and walk?
Medical parking.
That depends who you ask.
The guy across the street every day. Right?
Yeah, right.
So, and then again, these are fixed costs. The last piece of this, the audit fees, these are budgeted on a biannual basis. So really, this $142,000 is for this coming fiscal year 22, and fiscal year 23. Whatever they don't charge us in this fiscal year, they will likely charge us in the next fiscal year. So, and then same with the GASB 68 audit. We may actually see some savings there. The contract reads that it's up to $27,000 for the 2 fiscal years. And so they may not charge us that entire amount, but they certainly could if they want to. But we shouldn't see any expenses over that for 2 fiscal years. But we have to budget for both fiscal years, even in the first year, because they could technically charge us the whole thing next year, fiscal year, which I doubt they will. But so that puts us just with an increase of, you know, about $100,000 in the request from this year, you know, to last, and about 76% of that total increase is due to the new internal auditor position. So, and you can see on the bottom here where we're sitting, you know, our benefits paid for fiscal year 2020 versus our admin expenses. You know, we're at about 0.98%, and we, by statute, must stay under 1.5% of benefits paid for our admin expenses. So However, if you look at those next pieces, the amortization expense of $900,000 in depreciation, those pieces will drop off over the next, those are the M-Trust budget, or the M-Trust project, the phase 2 and phase 3. Actually, phase 2, the amortization was completed this year, so they were amortized over 4 years, and so we'll actually see a reduction in that amortization expense even this year, just because we're only down to amortizing phase 3 of the project versus just both phase 1, 2, and 3. So if you look at our admin expenses without that amortization and depreciation, or once that drops off, we are closer to like 0.7375%, percent. So of the benefits paid. So thought that was important. And then on the right side, that shows you where phase 2 was about $54,000 a month. That was hitting our amortization expense, and that was through January of 2021, so we're actually fully amortized on that project. Phase 3, we'll have about $35,000 a month through November of 2023. And then just those lease improvements, those are depreciation expenses, and that'll go through December of 2026, but those are much smaller than the amortization expenses that you're seeing from the M-Trust project.
How about reports from the committee?
Yeah, so pretty similar conversation, I guess, to what we had last week. I think Dan and I were both pretty impressed with conservative budget. We've always done a really good job with tracking it pretty well, and I know we both looked at that 0.98%, and that looks a little shocking relative to what we usually see, but it's obviously because of the M-Trust. It'll be gone soon, and we'll be back down to about half of what we're allotted, which is kind of what we've run historically, I think.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, so I didn't have anything extra. The only other question I forgot to ask last week, what's the escalator on the lease here? It's one big increase because we had like a bonus year, and then it's small increases from now on, right?
So we had since sort of a holiday for the time we moved in until this coming July 1st, and then from that point, it's the big jump to what the real market rate is, and then from then on, it's 3% per year.
Okay, makes sense. So with that answered, I would recommend that we approve the budget request that we've been had a chance to talk to.
Well, just general comments. In the several years that I've been serving on this budget committee, it's obvious that our primary responsibility is to look at this budget and question any what might even appear as inappropriate decision-making, budget items that may or may not be necessary or overlap. And quite frankly, as hard as I try, I can't find any. These guys do a very, very good job. Although there was one question that I asked last week that I didn't get a completely satisfactory answer on. On page 32, under other expenses, there's a subscription line item that had a $500 budget last year, only $40 of which has been spent so far. And that budget is down to $200 now. And both Nolan and Sean blamed Darla for this. And so I'm just curious what subscriptions are actually going on there.
You don't want to know.
No, in all sincerity, the fact that you're operating at roughly half of the allowed budget, and also, Nolan, just a question. With these new members that you found and you're starting to pay benefits to them, that increases the benefits paid. So it allows a little bit more leeway and flexibility in the administrative expenses as well, correct?
No, just to clarify how what we're doing is finding members who have not been active in the system for at least 7 years or more. So they're we're moving them to what's called the dormant status, and along with that, we're sending out a letter letting them know that, hey, you have an account balance with Montana Teachers Retirement System that's, in a dormancy status, and those folks are non-vested members, so we're encouraging them to withdraw from the system. So it's not benefits paid, it's not gonna increase the because those are retired members that are benefits.
Okay,
This is gonna increase our withdrawals from the system.
I see.
Yeah, so it's just more or less letting them know, hey, if you don't have any plans of returning to work as a teacher in Montana, it's in your best interest to withdraw from the system.
Mhm.
So it'll increase our withdrawals, it won't increase our benefits paid.
Got it.
And it will, have an effect on the balance sheet and things, but not substantial. I mean, not that we.
About how many letters did you send out?
There was 4,000 letters sent out in March and the first part of April, and then every month will be another 1,000 letters-ish, right around there, 1,200 to 1,000.
What approximate percentage of those are responding?
A lot. Yeah. As you can imagine, a lot of the folks don't, they didn't even know they had, maybe they substituted for a year and they didn't even realize they were part of the Montana Teachers Retirement System.
Okay.
And they're maybe getting their first contact from us because we haven't had a good address for those folks. We went through a big member search through the outside entity, through a contract, PBI, Pension Benefits Information LLC. So we went through a big search through them and found a bunch of members for the first time. So we're getting a lot of calls in the accounting department. Hey, I got this dormancy letter. What do I need to do? And we're sending out. Yeah, there is a lot of it. Yeah.
You really have money.
And so we're letting them know, what they can do, and but I would say the majority of them will withdraw. I mean, we were running withdrawals about twice a week now.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's kind of slowed down to about once a week, whereas normally we run them once every 10 days or so. We were having to run them about twice a week because there was hundreds of them coming in.
So has that significantly increased your need for short-term cash in the system itself?
No, not significant. I mean,
It's still pretty-
they're small, most of them are pretty small account balances because they're non-vested folks, and I would say even the majority of the ones that were sent out were, they may have been reported a couple months, so they have account balances less than $200,
I see.
But
So it's clear.
yeah, some of them, there's obviously a few of them that have 3 or 4 years of service, and
Good to get them off the books so you don't have to keep sending them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, no one did a fine job of explaining. I just would add, this is sort of a three-pronged thing. I mean, it's driven by the required minimum distributions, and we've always stayed on top of required minimum distributions for vested members, because they're entitled to a monthly benefit.
Right.
And we always have been able to keep those on track and get them either receiving their monthly benefit, or they also can refund if they want, but they have to get paid. The IRS wants their money. That's sort of the starting point, is that RMD requirement. And then what's sort of prompting all of these withdrawals is we have all these term non-vested folks that we haven't really been proactive about trying to get them, number one, notify them of the RMD requirement and try to get them off of our books. So there's those two things working together, and then we also started using a membership locator service through PDI, which we send them the data we have. They run it through, and there's actually cost increases in our budget for that. They run them through their process and send us back actual addresses we can get in touch with most of these folks, because we haven't been in contact with most of the ones that we're targeting right now, for 6+ years. So everyone that's been term non-vested for 6 or more years, in the month of their anniversary date, these letters are going out in mass. So it's been an M-Trust enhancement. So Tammy has been involved in this, and that and trust development team. And then obviously it's impacting accounting. And so for this first year, like Nolan said, the first month, we caught up January, February, April, and March. We did all 4 of those months in March at one time. And then every month after that, it's going to be approximately probably 1,000 or so a month. But we picked up all of the dormant members that were already moved to dormant in TRS because we never, at the time they were moved to dormant, no big effort was made to try to find them, and they were all term non-vested members with an account balance of less than like, $500 or something back in about 2002. They were moved dormant. So we included them in this first round, plus all of our other current top term non-vested members that have been in that status for 6 or more years. So we're being real proactive about getting the RMD requirements communicated to our members and trying to get them, if they have no intentions of coming back to TRS, take your money out, withdraw it from TRS. It's better for us anyway. Because on the back end of the RMD requirements, technically we should have to be sending certified letters and doing all this stuff to make sure, we have to somehow prove that, yes, we did everything in our power to try to find this member. We're talking about some balances that are, $50. I mean, the amount of money we've been spending to locate them is more than their account balance. So it's actually been working really well. Obviously, it's increased some of the workflow for accounting, but once we get through this first year, it will drop back down to a much more normal level.
Yeah, since we're catching up so many years over this year, we're gonna see a lot of letters go out, but then going, as of January of next year, we should see more like 100 to 100 or less letters going out every month, which will be a lot more manageable.
Do those members that you're not able to contact or simply don't respond to the letters that you send, are they still required to pay their RMDs on an individual basis, or could they use the justification that they weren't contacted by TRS in order to get out of the 50% federal penalty for not paying the RMD?
Right, well, so they're not gonna pay any RMD unless they actually get a distribution from us.
Unless it's sent.
Right, and so, I'm really simplifying this process that we've instituted, but we've set up a process whereby every single person, before they get moved to dormant status from this point going forward, will have received 7 different letters. And once we move them to dormant status, we no longer look for them. If they come back to us, we can reinstate their account and pay them out.
Do you ever escheat to the state at some point?
What's that?
Escheat that money? It's a funny word, but send that money to the state for in the missing property department or whatever it is?
No.
The trust fund would just retain that money. I mean, we have statutes about dormant status and writing off accounts and essentially, but we'll be able to document and prove that we did send these, because they'll be imaged. Each one of those 7 letters for every one of these members were imaged. And they'll have that paper trail. And, at that point, we've done everything.
And it just stays in limbo forever, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we have a process, a write-off process, where the funds actually we can always reinstate an account, so it sounds worse than it is, but they're sort of moved over to the pension accumulation fund, and then we can revive that account at any time.
Sounds like in this individual process, PBI was kind of a critical part of
They were.
making this work.
Yes, and if you look at the budget, our regular death audit costs went up quite a bit. We were paying, this is on page 28, we were paying about $5,000 a year for the regular death audit, which our whole retired payroll file goes through every month. And we're jumping that up to $12,500 because we've always used their standard service, and we actually did a test run of their premier service. It's called CertaDeath. And the very first time we ran through it, we found one individual where we would have saved about $18,000 in overpaid benefits, and then we found another one where it was less, but it was around $7,000. And we were able to recoup those funds, but it just would help prevent us having to go back to whoever's left and say, you owe TRS back money. Those letters and conversations are never fun. So that we're paying for a better level of service. And then the second line item, there's that address search service, and we're asking for $4,000 as we ended up spending $4,900 this year. But it is definitely integral to this working for us.
All right. Well, thanks, you guys.
This is an action item.
You will, yeah.
It will be down the way.
Got it.
Yeah, so we're still on discussion items and the Personnel Committee report. I'll just start by saying we met today, Janice and I are very supportive of our staff, all of the board is. We appreciate who we have, we want to help them in any way we can. We're at the 2018 market rate. Sean can maybe explain a little bit more about how the state has changed some things, and next year this is going to be a little bit more of a difficult process, but this year it was very easy. We had 9 employees that are receiving an approved increase. The maximum one was about 4.2%, and one person is getting 0.15%. It's not a lot of money overall. It's about $9,300.
$9,454.
$9,454 to increase the budget. They are not getting anything from the state this year either, so you know I'm never happy about that. But I'm not in control there. Darn it. So we, especially when you look at our budget and what we're doing, and we've got great employees. We want to keep them. So yeah, Jonas, do you have anything to add?
I think that they did a great job trying to make what they have work here, and wish you well figuring out how to make it all work next time.
Yeah, so we haven't really done any work towards that end yet, but what happened was the state came out with new classification standards, the State Human Resources Division. It's one of the things, we had really no input into it. We have no choice but to adopt it because all of the job codes we've always been under are no longer even in the system. So you'll notice in your packet, and it's an action item later, we need to update our pay plan policy to incorporate new Appendix B, which is the new job codes. With all of that said, for the current fiscal year, we're not even really addressing it. We're in year 2, because last year we just adopted the 2018 markets, right? We're in the second year, which is always how we sort of systematically approach our pay. We're in the second year of those market adjustments, and like Chair Pfeiffer already said, a little less than half of the staff is in line either because of a target change or because the cap that we used last year wasn't sufficient for them to get all the way to the market target we had for them. So this year it's pretty uncomplicated. Next year I think what it's going to mean is we're going to have to put quite a bit of thought and work into what's our approach to pay. Our real overall philosophy and policy is going to have to change to some degree because the midpoint now isn't as meaningful as it was in a system. Broadband 20 has been in use now for almost 20 years, I think. It's been a long time. This is brand new. It's going to be more of a look at where are we at today versus what the market really is. But the midpoint may not be the target. It's going to be position specific. Some markets went up, some markets went down. They sort of conglomerated quite a few different positions into the same classification. So long story short, we have work to do next year. For the current year, really all we're doing is implementing what we already sort of agreed to do last year. We always have to wait until this point in the year because we don't know. We could have had a really bad year, and it just won't be prudent for any raises, but that's not the case. So the other thing we did was we froze bands 7 and 8, which is our 4 highest paid positions. There were a few of those that were in line to get an increase, but based on direction we got from the governor's office, we just don't think that's prudent at this time. So they're going to stay flat for this next year.
Forgot to mention that part. All right. And then we're just on to the next tentative meeting dates. I want to check the calendars quickly. We like to at least look at the next one for sure. And that October one is important because,
It is, and Madam Chair and members of the board, I apologize, I sort of was asking for us to change the August meeting to August 13th because I thought I had a wrestling camp that I had to put on, but I do not at this point, so if you would, it's totally up to the board. I don't have any request for August, whatever works best for the board, because I think it originally was August 6th,
7th.
or 7th.
6th,
Okay, August 6th.
unless we want to do it on Saturday.
And then I was proposing to move it to 30, but the reasons for my proposal no longer exist, so I'll leave it.
Other than the fun of meeting on Friday the 13th.
Yeah, that's true.
Ironically, I have a conflict on the 13th, so.
You do? Okay.
So 6 is
anyway,
Friday,
we could do the 5th, because I do have a family reunion in Sandpoint on the 7th, but
I don't have a problem earlier in the week.
earlier, since it's summer.
5th is fine.
5th is fine with me.
All right, let's do the 5th.
Okay, and then, so our August 5th meeting this year, we're in the second year, so it will be more of a longer time spent on strategic planning, and Jim Cairns, we'll probably have Jim Cairns come in and facilitate some of that, so I'll work with Jim to get him here on the 5th. And then I think Gary said they verify.
Yeah, could you verify October 8th too? I have nothing on my schedule yet, so. That's way too far for me.
It's good for me.
Looks good at the moment.
All right, so those 2 dates for sure, and then we'll look at the others, but it, just an FYI, December 3rd is just out there, so. As a teacher still, I try to get all my dates set up for the best subs. This is also now an opportunity for public comment, if anybody had anything off budget or committees or. All right, so now we're on to our action items. And the first action item is the interest rate credited to member accounts. We look at this every May.
Well, it's definitely not the same view we had the last couple of years.
Our shot in the dark last year wasn't very close.
Sorry, Madam Chair, members of the board, so it wasn't, I mean, this is one of those areas that it feels kind of weird to me when we're looking at a 20% rate of return assumption, or not assumption, but potential rate of return for this year, and we're reducing the interest on member account from 0.85 to 0.2. There's nothing, it's, all statute says is the board annually sets that interest rate. We've always historically used the STIP rate as a sort of the guideline, and we've tried to stay pretty close to that. But there's nothing that says it has to be exactly what the STIP rate was, or otherwise. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think in my write-up I recommended, because it's probably going to end up being less than 0.25%, even if you look at the trend, it's going to be low. And I talked to Director Villa, and all indications are it's going to be low again all next year. You know,
Do you foresee much feedback, positive or negative, from members about that exact, I mean, imagine calls coming in, hey, the stock market's going crazy, how come we're only getting 1/4%? Will you have to field many calls like that, do you think?
so not a lot, but I mean, just this week I've had to field 2, and it was emails, you know, wanting to know why is the interest rate for their contributions so low, you know, and of course, part of that explanation is really your account with balance plus interest doesn't impact how your benefit is calculated.
Right.
And that's the biggest thing, and then once you are retired receiving a benefit, that's guaranteed for your lifetime. And most of the time, the light goes on at that point, but, you know, they come back with arguments, well, I can make better than that in pretty much any online, you know, savings, which, you know, may or may not be true. I mean, the STIP rate is it's slightly better than the cash rate. I mean, it's not a lot.
Right.
Yeah, the only ones that are impacted by this are generally the non-vested, inactive,
Anyone?
that were given back that's a few $100. I mean, it's just like a savings account for them, so it shouldn't be a big windfall. And truly, those who work through the system and get to retirement age, it has zero impact on them, other than maybe mentally.
Right. Yes. I mean, certainly we have vested members that choose to withdraw as well. I mean, that's, for whatever reason, their personal, in their personal life, they have to do it.
So it might be a little insolent to tell them, be happy, don't live in Germany, you'd be getting a negative rate.
Right. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure the board is aware that used it historically as a guide point, and certainly some of you that have been on the board a long time have lots of experience with this.
And since we are fiduciaries, and we're looking out for the whole system, I would have a hard time saying, well, yeah, 2% makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
It doesn't make sense.
Well, and it's pretty much in black and white in terms of how we justify what we're doing. And we just continue to do that, so if we need a motion to do that, I would make a motion.
Second.
And your motion is to set it at what rate?
My motion is set at, 0.25.
May I ask one quick question before we vote? So let's assume for a second that we set it at something probably reasonable, let's say 1%. The backup in our own cash, the difference between that and the rate that we're paying out would just be a deficit to our administrative system, right?
Yeah, it's absorbed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that
Through the assets of the system.
that would be outside of our fiduciary responsibility for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did find out last year that we cannot change this mid-year. We get one
Right.
shot a year.
Get one shot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't think it's going up anytime this year.
I don't know.
It's gonna be lower than that is my problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is.
Probably gonna be, what, 0.15 maybe?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, we've got a motion on the floor and a second that it would be at the 0.25. Is there any further comments, conversation about that? All right, well, let's, all in favor of the 0.25% increase indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right.
Chair votes aye as well. Anyone nays? Thank you. It's never comfortable when you're like, ugh. It does make sense, and they just have to understand what that really is. It's not your account, so, and it is. Anyways, we also need a motion to renew Ice Miller's contract, and that is page 30.
Page, so the contract is page 37. 36 is a letter that we have to send to the Legal Services Review Committee. It kind of summarizes what Ice Miller does for us, but the real
I would move approval of renewing the contract with us.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? Also, the Drake Law Firm, who have been instrumental in helping us in a number of things lately.
I move the renewal of Drake Law Firm contract.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion there?
I'd
Was
just
there-
echo your happiness with their help, and we really appreciate Michael.
Yeah.
He's great.
You know what I think too, it's just, we're all busy, we all have our own things too, and then he makes sure that he contacts us. He makes sure we get the information that we need. It's not like, well, call me if you can need it. No, he makes sure you get it, and I do appreciate
He's
that.
almost always available.
He is, night or
Almost
day,
always.
he's,
Great.
yeah, he's great.
And the good news is we have nothing pending. First time in a number of years.
Oh, Denise.
That's not wood.
I'm not near any wood. Let's keep it that way.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? All right. This is where we also need to vote on the TRS, the new pay plan policy that we'll be adopting, that Appendix B. And it is in there, there's Appendix A, and then the Appendix B is on the back side, and so then you can see kind of, Janice and I looked at this today, it has changed. It's changed our, the actual job codes have changed, the beginning, middle, endings have changed, the hourlies have changed. So I asked why they did it. Right before Bullock left, this was changed, and then being adopted right now, so.
And the blue language was recommendations from HR, a language change.
All right. We have a motion for the TRS Board policy.
So moved.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This may be something, I know this is you looking at it kind of for the first time, but Janice and I we worked with Sean on this and keep you apprised of what's
Well,
going
you
on.
don't exactly have a choice, so.
Yeah.
And on the final, they did spell Carrie's name right on the back page.
Carrie does that her name half the time, so it's all good. All right. All those in favor then of the new TRS pay plan policy indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? And then we also need a motion for the 2022 TRS budget request.
Move approval. Second?
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? We kind of already have had a discussion. All right. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? Okay.
And thank you to the budget committee.
Yes, definitely. And next meeting, August 5th. Out. But public comment isn't on here, but if anybody else has anything for public?
I'd just like to say, Sarah Piper, MFPE, we really appreciate the work of the board and the thoroughness that you guys take to pay attention to all of the various parts, and also the staff here and all the work they've done to make sure that the budget is in line, that the administrative costs are low, and that everybody's really looking out for members, so thank you.
All right, we're on to our board training, the Non-Discrimination in Employment and Provisions Act. Denise, you gonna go through that with us? Was it the last time, or is it the same one then, from 2015? We do this every year, don't we?
Yes, it's the same policy. Chairperson Elliott, members of the board. So just as a sort of preface, I have 10 minutes left now to get through this, and I think we can make it. What you're receiving here, frankly, is training on our policy. What our staff members receive is training on the underlying expectations with respect to non-discrimination, sexual harassment, disability, accommodation, all of those kinds of things. So you get a foreshortened version. We'll have to set up training for staff in the near future, and if anybody's interested in viewing the whole, I know you have before, we used to do an aggregated kind of process, so we can certainly include you in that as well if you're interested, but at this point, you're reviewing the policy, not for approval purposes, nothing has changed. So clearly, as the policy states, there is a lot of state law, policy and administrative rules regarding equal employment opportunity, non-discrimination, harassment prevention, ADA compliance, all of those kinds of things. This policy adopts those, it doesn't supersede them. And those are the things that frankly our staff receive training on. So the most recent change to this was to add protected classes, a protected class for sexual orientation, if I'm recalling correctly. So the protected class status definition in the policy identifies all of the things currently in Montana and federal law that make somebody either actually a member of a protected class or the perception of participation or attachment to a protected class may arise. And so Montana law is more expansive than federal law. For example, I don't believe sexual orientation yet has been added to the federal law as a protected class. It may have been since I last looked. But so discrimination is prohibited based on race, color, national origin, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, religion, creed, sex, sexual orientation, political beliefs, genetic information, veteran status, culture, social origin or condition, or ancestry. So that's pretty broad.
Basically, everybody.
Yeah. We all would fit into one or the other of those. But for purposes of state statute, the policy provisions make it very clear that we make our decisions, we provide benefits, we employ people on the basis of merit and eligibility only, not based on any other classifications or qualifications, so we avoid issues with discrimination. Interestingly, we're doing this policy when over the last couple of weeks we've had a few, probably the last month, a couple of ADA compliance requests come up, and this is for accessible alternative formats of documents. So, and those are, in our world, really kind of the majority of discrimination issues are the ADA compliance for accessibility and availability of information. And I think we ask for assistance from State Human Resources if we need it, and we apply the law and provide the information in a manner that works for the person who needs it. So, aside from not discriminating against people, we're not allowed to retaliate against people who make complaints or raise issues related to discrimination. We are required to have a contract provision in any service contracts with third-party providers that make sure that they are complying with the state and federal law and essentially complying with this policy on the same issues. We have to provide training to our staff in non-discrimination. That comes from, and some of you may recall this from previous conversations, that comes from prior case law where it was found to be a violation of the Governmental Code of Fair Practices to simply say you comply with the law unless you can demonstrate that you train your staff in how to comply with the law.
Let me ask you a question on that.
You bet.
Is that based on a volume of content, a periodic amount of time between training, or just a general amount of time per year?
Yeah, it is not specific.
Okay.
I mean, the case law on that was not specific. We can, develop reasonable approaches to complying with that. And so we do. I mean, we provide training to our staff internally. Staff here could tell you it's a much longer, more inclusive conversation than what we have with you here today. So, and it may be time, given the number of people that we have, new staff members that we have as well, that we bring in the State Human Resources people to go through the sort of broad.
But normally you just do it?
Yeah. We had John Padeo do it.
Yeah, a couple of times.
3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, I mean, and that's kind of how every 3 or 4 years or so we have him come in and do, because he does the whole, here's the law, here's how it developed, here's the, more information about what a reasonable accommodation is, all those kinds of things. That it's kind of a moving target. So for me to keep up on those things every year, I certainly know the background, but the specifics get a little more difficult. So there's information in here pertinent to our staff in particular about how to file a complaint or to whom to make a complaint. Was that the correct word?
Yeah.
If they have a complaint of discrimination or believe that they do. So also required in our policy, but also provided in state policy. So Wow, 5 minutes. Anybody have specific questions? You want more?
Well, high five to you.
Yeah.
We are impressed, we are impressed, yes, there's our word.
So I think that is it. Yeah, unless.
Thank you.
All right, so, we need help with someone who will be on the call at 10:15, so let's take our breaks now and make sure we're back here right then.
Okay.
We'll call the meeting back to order. And this is for the informal board review, discussion item of Cheryl McGinnis, earned compensation.
She's in the waiting room, Madam
Okay.
Chair. Just let me know.
So
Or
go
Sean, you
ahead, go ahead and
go.
let her in and.
I had messaged her earlier and let her know that we would be reconvening shortly.
All right, this is our informal board review for Cheryl McGinnis of earned compensation. Cheryl, are you with us?
So it appears she's here, but Cheryl, your mic is on mute.
Yes, thank you. I just noticed that. Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. We're going to begin this discussion item, all right? Is this you, Sean?
Sure. So Madam Chair, members of the board, behind tab number 6, you'll see a short write-up on this issue. And really what it is Ms. McGinnis is asking for an exception to the 110% cap on earned compensation. There are 3 supporting documents in your board packet, the first of which is Ms. McGinnis's original request for reconsideration of the 110% cap. It came to staff, and that prompted a TRS final staff determination, which was the second document that was sent out on 4/1/21. And then the final document is Ms. McGinnis's request for TRS Board informal review. Hopefully, the board has had a chance to read both of Ms. McGinnis's request as well as the TRS staff determination. I mean, ultimately, and I can go into more detail if needed, but ultimately, we've applied the cap as required in 19-20-715-2. And unless there's questions, I think I would leave it at that, Madam Chair, and maybe give Ms. McGinnis a chance to speak.
All right, Ms. McGinnis, would you like to let us know what your thoughts are here?
I do have just a short 1-page presentation prepared, if I could read that at this time.
Yes, you may.
All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my case. I do understand that Montana Code 19-20-715 has been on the books for over 20 years, but in my case, I do not believe it's the right application. I ask you to help me change this policy practice to address it correctly. For 24 plus years, I was a teacher and later a part-time administrator at Fort Benton Schools that worked on a 187-day contract. On July 1st, 2018, I began as superintendent for Geraldine Schools on a 260-day contract. I knew I would be making less per day than I was a teacher, but I accepted that challenge. Even today, 3 years later, I make $27.80 less than I did as a teacher per day. Each of these 3 years, I've worked 10 to 16-hour days, and I feel I've earned my salary. I expected during the last 3 years, when my full salary paid into TRS, not just 110% of the previous year, that I would be paid retirement based on the average of my 3 highest years that I had paid into TRS. When one calculates percentage change, and I did teach middle school math for 20 years, based on 9 months to a 12-month contract, it appears to be a 25% increase in time. However, when you calculate it based on 260 days versus 187 days, It's slightly over a 39% increase in days, for 139%, yet 110% earned compensation limitation still applies. I recognize that ignorance of the law is just that, ignorance, but I'd like to make mention of the fact that I've talked to over a dozen superintendents, clerks, and was aware of 19-20-715. I also believe that I understand the intent of the law, and I do not believe that my situation resides within the intent of the law to keep TRS recipients from inflating their salaries at the end of their careers. I also need to highlight the fact that I'm sure you're aware any superintendent must first serve as a teacher before being allowed to be certified as a superintendent. This is the required pathway. Most, however, serve more than 3 years, as I myself intended to do. It changed everything about the way we do our jobs, live our lives, and even before you as a board asking to make allowances or changes to the application of this law. I always understood and had been told repeatedly that my retirement would be based on the average of my highest 3 years of salary that I paid in TRS. Earned of 1927, I contacted the legislature was in session. Mr. Seth Bergley, Mr. Fred. I yet heard any response from any of these individuals. So I ask, please assist me in this matter and allow my compensation for salary that I have paid into to be based on. Thank you.
Right. Then you were cutting in and out a little bit there. I'm going to ask if anybody else needs to have you repeat anything. It would go quiet and then it would go loud again. So did anybody need her to repeat any parts of that?
It sounded like you mentioned you had spoken to some legislators or tried to reach out. We couldn't quite catch that part, I don't think, but otherwise I think I caught most of it.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry about the cutting out. Yes, I contacted the 3 legislators that are head of the Education Committee, Mr. Seth Bergley, Mr. Fred Anderson, and Ms. Molly Funk, as well as Dennis Harmon, head of MREO. And I have not got a response back from any of them. I expected, since this was a legislative year, it would be the perfect time to address it.
Okay. Thank you.
So what do we need to do, Denise?
Well, I guess, Madam Chair, I think the law, the application of the law from staff's perspective is laid out, I mean, I think fairly clearly in the final staff determination. So unless, Denise, unless you want to, if you have something outside of this staff determination you want to address, we could just leave it to questions from the board, or did you have something you wanted to address?
No, I think it is all, I mean, if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer those, but I think the law is laid out in the determination.
Was the movement from a 9-month to a 12-month contract, is that specifically addressed in the law? I haven't looked at that in a long time.
So, Madam Chair, Member Trost, the only exception that is allowed for in current law is movement on an employer's adopted salary matrix. So that's movement between the steps and the lanes on the matrix. Now, we have an old administrative rule on the book that no longer applies. That used to be one of the exceptions, was change in position, change in employer, there were all these laundry lists of things that used to be accepted from the 110% cap, and those have all been subsequently been superseded by the change in statute, which happened, I believe, 2011, that now only provides for one exception, and that only exception is for movement on the adopted salary matrix.
Really, it doesn't address the number of days you work. That's irrelevant. It's the compensation.
It's the annual compensation.
Right. So if somebody has an extended contract as a teacher, for example, I mean, that's overall an increase in the compensation. And they too would have the 110% rule applied to it, even though it's an extended contract.
And, you know, I've sat on the board since 2004, and that is what we see. There's always situations, and they're difficult to look at, you know, especially when it's going to affect your retirement. However, I think that, in my opinion, we need to just follow the law as it's written. We don't have the ability to say it's not applicable here.
And members of the board, the only thing I would add is we routinely have to apply this cap, you know, 'cause we're not doing anything different in Ms. McGinnis's case than we do for any other member, and so we have, you know, several of these every year, you know, more than 10 most years that we apply the cap, and we apply it uniformly.
And you apply that cap whether it's a retirement year or not, right?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
have
so
to attribute it
the
to
total
anyone.
compensation is reported to TRS regardless of what they're earning. If it's the years used to calculate average final compensation, which for tier 1 includes the 4th year back, because that sets the cap for the 3rd year back. The
Right.
3rd year sets the cap for the 2nd, so on and so forth. Anything in excess of that 110% cap is still used to enhance their benefit, but it's used as termination pay option 2, which the dollar amount is divided by your total number of years of service credit, and that is the amount that affects your AFC, instead of it being the full.
Right. I don't see how we can make exceptions to what the statute is that you uniformly apply, you know, for years.
Right. So we have an action item to either approve or disapprove of the final staff determination. Could I have a motion?
I would move that we accept the final staff determination in this case.
It's been moved by Mr. Greenfield,
I second.
second by Daniel Chamberlain. Any further discussion on this item?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, may I just make a point and
You might
here
have-
after your vote?
Denise, you might have to move up so Ms. McGinnis can
Sorry.
hear you.
Of course, your determination in this matter is subject to Ms. McGinnis's right to file, to request a contested case proceeding in this matter. So we would issue, whatever your determination is, we will issue a written notice of that determination along with her appeal rights essentially after you conclude.
That was Ms. Pizzini, our lawyer. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? Thank you for your time, Ms. McGinnis. I know that this is not the, what you wanted to hear. However, as fiduciaries of the board, we do need to consider each of these cases individually and apply the law as we see fit.
I appreciate that. May I ask a couple of questions?
Yes.
Can you tell me why the law changed in 2011, or the previous practice changed in 2011?
So, Denise, do you want to address that? I mean, there used to be, and they're still out there, you can see the exceptions that were previously available. They're not available for anyone that retires after July 1 of 2011. There was a laundry list of different things the board could make exceptions for, and I wasn't here in 2011, but we have 2 board members that were, both Ms. Pfeiffer, or Ms. Elliott, and Mr. Dubs. There were routinely these things coming in front of the board, and not a lot of guidance in statute on what you should accept and shouldn't, or in administrative law, what you should accept and shouldn't accept. And so the move was made to, number one, prevent salary spiking by, you know, sort of clamping down on what is accepted from the 10% cap, and it was placed in statute and made very clear at that time that the only exception is for movement on the adopted salary matrix. And I can, if either board member Dubs or Elliott want to speak additionally to their time on the board, they can certainly do that.
One thing that I would say, Mrs. McGinnis, that the retirement benefit that is paid to our retired members is a result of their years of service. And obviously, if we have part of our membership that drastically changes, and I'll include more than 10% of the salary before they get to retirement, that ultimately is paid by everybody else. And I think the reason why the law changed in particular in 2011 was because there was it appeared to be an unfair advantage for some individuals heading into it, especially those that were willing to be active with the board. That's in part why that law was changed, so that individuals would not game the system essentially by going to the board and asking for exceptions.
Yeah, and I think, as I look back on a lot of the different ones I recall, it's typically never a teacher who's going to gain more than 110% in their last 10 years. There were some exceptions. There were people who, in their last 3 years, would get into driver's ed, football coaching. They had like 26 jobs to get higher salaries, but it was the superintendents. And so we were constantly dealing with superintendents that were able to really spike their salaries in the last 3 years, and it was an unfair burden upon all the rest of the teachers. And we were dealing with it on a constant basis. And again, it was one of those things where, everybody felt that they had a reason, and they do. I'm not saying, you have earned that salary. I just don't think that when we look at actuarially in the system, you haven't necessarily earned that benefit. So that's where I come from on that one.
I guess my next question would be then, why, when I moved from, I know you have my salaries in front of you, from $60,090 to $70,000, when that was more than 10%, why was TRS taken out of the full amount? Do you understand what I'm saying? If I'm not going to get credited for it.
Actually, I would disagree with that last comment. You do get credit for it, and there is a way for you to make yourself whole through the termination process. But as a general rule, we would only allow 10% of that to go into the final 3-year determination.
And so, Ms. McGinnis, anything that is in excess of the 110% cap is used as excess earnings, and that it's called excess earnings. It's used as term pay option 2. So whatever that dollar amount is divided by your total number of years of service credit, and then that is the amount your AFC is increased by, instead of it being the total amount divided by the 3 years to make up your AFC.
May I also ask, where did this 110% number come from? What generated that?
So at the time, so the 110% cap has been in effect since even before 2011. When it was first put into place, it was, was considered the industry standard to some degree. However, if you were to look around the United States large public plans today, that cap in most of the systems now is 105%, and even down as low as 103%. And it really is to prevent salary spiking, because you may have a 30-year career where 25 of those years were at, they're going to grow every year. Let's say average $50,000 a year, and then in the final 5 years, you jump up to $100,000 a year. The system hasn't been compensated for benefits at that level, and that's why that cap is in place.
All right, so who do I contact about taking this on to a contested case?
So you will receive a letter from TRS that indicates, number one, the board's decision today, and in that letter, it will include information about your appeal rights. So we will give you all the information you need to appeal this to a contested case matter in the letter itself.
All right, thank you for your time, Ms. McGinnis. Okay, so we're moving on to legal counsel's report. Denise, do we have much to report?
It's open meeting, so she's welcome to say it.
She has dropped off.
Elliot, members of the board, I'm sorry. I have a few things to go through. And I'm sorry, bear with me, just as background. I have always tried to, because I assume that other people view our board meeting minutes the same way I review or view school district board meeting minutes as a source of information. I have always tried to put an endpoint to our substantial contested cases on board record. So if somebody's looking for what the outcome was, they can find it there. So I know this is old news, but for purposes of our minutes, the Montana Supreme Court issued its final decision in the Ed Zabrocki versus TRS contested case matter on February 23rd. They upheld the TRS board's determination in that matter in all respects. They have issued, there was a 15-day opportunity for Mr. Zabrocki to request reconsideration by the Supreme Court. He did not do that. The Supreme Court issued a notice of remittitor. So the case is done now, over with, after 9.5 years. So that was
Congratulations.
Check.
So, unless there are questions on that, the next thing I wanted, and I mentioned this to Sean, he went through the renewal, approval for renewal of the two attorney contracts, Ice Miller and the Drake Law Firm. He also mentioned, and in the packet are the letters that go, the request letters that go to the Legal Services Review Committee. Legal services don't have to be competitively procured as long as they're approved by the Legal Services Review Committee. That's through an executive order. The oldest one we can find, it was issued by Governor Schwinden. It has been renewed and amended somewhat over the intervening years with the change in administration and change in people who are now participating on the Legal Services Review Committee. We have not yet received confirmation back from them, approval to enter into either of those contracts. Just wanted you to know. So if by chance we were to get a no on either of them, we would have to address what to do about that. So, okay. Also, just to let you know, you're going to see 3 disabilities applications today. I think you're going to see comments from maybe both of our current contracting physician reviewers, doctor reviewers on those 2 cases. Both Dr. Schofield and Dr. Gregg have notified us of their retirement. Dr. Gregg at the end of March. Dr. Schofield as of June 30th. We have entered into contracts with replacement physicians or replacement doctors. Dr. Mary Kay Bogomil is the PhD mental health provider who will be contracting to provide those review services. We just don't want you to be wondering the first time you see one of these cases with a different name, who these people are and why they're different. Dr. Bogomil does disability reviews for Social Security Administration as well, and we have curriculum vitae and licensure verification and that on file if you're interested in seeing any of that. She's highly qualified. She's been the Psychologist Association chairperson for the state of Montana I think currently she may be in that position. Gwendolyn Pinkham is the MD. Interestingly, before receiving her MD degree, she practiced as a psychologist for quite some time, so she is also a PhD. Also highly qualified, also does disability reviews for Social Security Administration. And while our review standards are somewhat different, they're not totally dissimilar, so having people who have that experience as well is helpful. So you will be seeing things for them in the future. The only other thing that I have, and I'm going to go through a few of them very quickly, is I typically do a review of any administrative legislation that pertains to TRS. So I'm going to go through these really quickly, so Jeff will give me another high five. It looks like we're going to have another employer entity in the form of a new community college in Bitterroot Valley. That was, creation of the district was approved by the legislature. Specifically changing TRS law, there was a bill to change venue provisions in for state agency actions. So our Bill 192201, which is the provision that gives you authority as a quasi-judicial board essentially to hold contested case hearings and determine contested matters. The very final provision, subpart in that statute, says that venue for judicial review of your contested case determination will be in the First Judicial District Court in Lewis and Clark County. We made that change in statute, in fact, in 2013. Many of you probably remember that in Maven Camp, we actually, Dave Sen and I actually traveled to Ravalli County a couple of times, and the judicial review was with Judge Langton there. So now venue will be in whatever county the person who brings the contested case matter resides in. If they don't reside in the state of Montana, then it will be in Lewis and Clark County.
I remember Maven Camp.
Pardon?
I remember Maven.
Yeah. Okay, there was a joint resolution that allows, and I don't believe this has a lot of impact for us, but it could. A joint resolution that was vetoed by the governor, but the veto was overwritten, that allows the legislature by joint resolution to vacate or void an administrative rule that was enacted during the interim preceding the legislative session that they don't disagree with or don't like for whatever reason. And then any administrative rule that is promulgated to replace it has to comply with their reasons for, vacating the first administrative rule. And if you want to know how, bill numbers are that on any of these, let me know, but I'm just going over that. So this one has been transmitted to the governor. Sean, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Once transmitted to the governor, he has 10 days to sign it or veto it. If he does neither, it becomes law without his signature. So this one was transmitted to the governor. Did I have that right, Sean?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Was transmitted to the governor on 5/4. It's public right to know settlement. So it pertains to settlement agreements entered into by state agencies, and it says that we cannot put privacy provisions or non-disclosure provisions in settlement agreements. We don't in any case, and we never have. It's always been clear to us that settlements we enter into, as well as the contested case proceedings that might lead up to settlement agreements, are public record, and we don't put non-disclosure provisions in them. I'm gonna do these two next. There was a change in law regarding independent contractors. Certainly there are circumstances where we have an issue with that. And it is that It cannot be determined, and this is pertinent to one of our administrative rule on independent contractors. The fact that somebody does not have an exemption certificate from the Department of Labor and Industry cannot be evidence that they are not actually an independent contractor. They still have the opportunity to prove that. Right now, our administrative rule essentially requires an exemption certificate for a determination, as a baseline for a determination that somebody's an independent contractor. There is a bill, and I didn't write down on here whether it's enrolled, but I don't know if it's been signed, but requiring strategic planning by state agencies. It seems to be limited to the 20 agencies in state government. It does not, by my review, specifically refer to attached to agencies or the like. That requires a strategic planning report be submitted to legislative services or every year. So we do it we strategic plan, so just giving the heads up that may apply to us at some point. The other two things, I'm sure you're all aware, there was a charter school bill that I frankly sort of fully expected to pass, but it did not, so we didn't have to run that gauntlet. There were, however, a couple of other, when I say run that gauntlet, I mean in determining whether those are state public employees eligible to participate in the system or not. Two other bills, both have been signed by the governor already, and to make them very simple, both sort of address the school work interface and work as educational experience, essentially, that makes somebody eligible for a high school diploma or that sort of thing. I would assume that, Jeff, you're probably familiar with these House Bill 246 and 556 House bills. And alternative means of earning a diploma. I only mention these because we've already addressed the work and school. All of the community colleges, or most of the community colleges, have enhanced programs over the last few years where they have an educational program that is fundamentally involved with working with employers in the community to get people work experience in areas where they're providing education. And so we've addressed some issues regarding whether people who are in that educational program are TRS reportable. So I expect that we may have some work along that line as well to do at the high school level now. So, but it's way too early to know what. I think that's all I have, unless there are questions.
I think that's high-fiveable.
Yeah, thanks for that information. Fusion items. Now, we're a little bit ahead, but we're on to the communication manager's report.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, I think you've probably seen this little summary. I'll just sort of go through it. And I brought some visual aids that Tammy won't be able to see, but just as a matter of course, we do a lot of website updates, and with COVID, there was quite a few to be done. And in the legislature, it wasn't quite as crazy as it is some sessions, as you've already heard. And then just on the employer communications and collaboration, we've managed to have some pretty good progress in this area, even with all the weirdness going on. One thing that Nolan spoke about was just the ability to better communicate with the employers about delinquent reporting and that sort of thing. And one nice side benefit is that the bulk email service we use through the Department of Administration produces really good reports when an email fails. So Nolan's staff keep employer contact information in the system, but, you know, they don't think to call us and tell us that they've just switched their email provider and the address is different, or someone's left the clerk position. So when I get a failure on sending out a memo, it really helps. I just give it to his staff and they do some follow-up and get it updated in our system. So that's been pretty helpful, but it, you know, it was just sort of a side benefit of that service. One thing we had started before COVID was, probably a lot of you are familiar with Jane Knudsen. She's great. She does trainings on how to survive retirement, you know, for the clerks. And she had produced some little sort of hand-drawn flowcharts, and we worked with her to make a really nice one about how to handle the churn pay part. That's complicated. As you can just see this little flowchart front and back. It's pretty complicated. So that was kind of nice for us to work with her and hear their side of all the steps they have to do as the business manager in the school district, and how it relates to what we do, and try and develop a handout that helps them. And this is probably not in your packet, it's just something I wanted to mention, and it was a really nice opportunity. We don't get those opportunities that often to really do a joint project. So Jane's a rock star as far as training other clerks on how to do this stuff.
Is that going to be published somewhere?
Pardon me?
Is that going to be published?
Yeah, it's being used now in our presentation that we do to MASBO.
You send me a copy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it online any place?
It will be.
In the...
What we're doing, excuse me, and that's the next topic anyway, is those regional MASBO meetings. I get the presentation already, and usually Jonelle would give one about termination pay, just a presentation for clerks on that. And then at the annual MASBO conference, Nolan would give his new clerks presentation. Of course, this year everything was different, so we just sort of added some pieces of Nolan's into the termination pay one. And this handout was in there. And Jane also had a more paragraph-based write-up for her clerks that we provided input on, but it's not really our document. So this one is, it was a collaboration, but it is our document. So it was included in that as one of the handouts. So those were given over Zoom, and I have a recording of one of them. And so I'm going to get that edited and posted on our website, and then this will be with it.
Darla can send everyone, all the board members, a copy of that, though, if you want to see it.
It's kind of technical, but it was just a neat, so I think there are some clerks that view that as a contentious process, or a lot of busy work, and they don't really understand why they have to do it, or they don't quite understand the reason for it.
I think that's what it is.
So this was a nice thing to just sort of help Jane improve her presentation, her training that she does. Not that there was anything wrong with it, just that it helped fill in some of those question marks that they may have had about why TRS needs this, why this date, we don't really understand. So that was nice. And I was, of course, I'm not the expert in this area, but I was just the one that made the picture and helped coordinate it. Okay, and I don't believe we're going to participate in person at the MASBO conference in June, but it may be virtual, so we're just not exactly sure yet what's going to happen there. One of the things Nolan included in his presentation was just asking them how they felt about the new member process, and we described that to you guys last year. And that instead of the clerks having to collect enrollment forms and record of membership forms and send them in and collect all those beneficiary designation forms, it's mostly triggered automatically by their first report of wages. So, and it triggers some letters, and it's just a lot more modernized and a lot better. So none of the clerks had any concerns about that, it didn't sound like.
Less work for them, why would they be concerned?
Yeah, less paperwork, absolutely. A lot of times they had packets already printed of all the forms, and that was kind of always a challenge because they would have a version of the beneficiary designation form from 7 years ago in these, stacks of paper. So we finally just said, please destroy all those here. Do something, use this new process. So, and speaking of the beneficiary designation process that was implemented in 2018, and I gave you guys a little review of that a couple of years ago. Now, as Sean already mentioned, we are working on doing online withdrawal application. And of course, because that involves a financial transaction, that's why the additional security was implemented. So the two-factor authentication for anybody who logs into my TRS. So then that now allows us to go forward with figuring out how the online application, the withdrawal application will actually work. And normally, and that's a pretty big enhancement, normally, when we're not under pandemic conditions, we would have what we call JAD sessions. We would all be in a room and talking with the developers and the subject matter experts and the system project team. But we couldn't do that this time. It all had to be telephone calls and Zoom meetings. So Monica, who's our project manager and test lead, because I had been so heavily involved with sort of the user interface design for the online beneficiary designation, she said, would you just sort of draw out how you think this should be? So that just took a lot of my time, but it was a big project and an extra kind of fun thing, but kind of difficult thing for me, but it was useful. And I think it did use a lot of what we learned, all the lessons learned from the first time we did this with beneficiary designation. So that was a lot of work, but it's well underway now, and we can't wait to see how it turns out. And then there's, of course, always a lot of documentation that has to go along with that. So we'll have a new fact sheet and some checklists for here's what you're going to need before you enter this process and apply it. If you're going to do a rollover, there's just a lot of information we have to somehow provide to members so that they can successfully complete the transaction. But we do, of course, still have to have a paper application. So once we get done, and this is the same thing that happened with the online beneficiary designation, that just examining that process and thinking about how to do it in an online way uncovers some things that, we could probably improve the way it works on paper as well. So it's just a good process to go through. And along with that, one of the things that has been discussed in terms of the objectives on the strategic plan is trying to make members more aware of sort of timeline-based things, like when they're vested. And for an online withdrawal, of course, if they're vested, there's a whole nother business logic path that has to be taken so that they can get an estimate of benefits and decide, do you really want to withdraw, or do you want to have a monthly benefit for the rest of your life? So that's one path of business logic. If they're not vested, in the system, there's vested and non-vested, and everybody kind of understands that division. But within the system, there's sometimes people who are really not working anymore, but they're still in an active status in our system. And that changes the system logic. So we have to then get certification from the employer that they really have terminated, they're not planning to come back again in the summer, or whatever the case might be. So it's just a matter of how do you explain all that to a member. That's sort of like how the sausage gets made on the inside, are they in a terminated status or not? So it occurred to me that we should put something on the actual page where they start this process, which is where they see their account balance. We should actually just put right up there if they're vested. Before it wasn't really shown, it was kind of, so that was just a simple thing that I thought, that's what we've been saying all along. We should try and make it more obvious to people when they reach these milestones. So as we start working on putting the little entry point to the online withdrawal process, we'll
Put a little
have
graph saying, you are now 76% vested.
Yeah, well, that's all by year. So if they have 5 years, we're just going to say, you're vested. It'll just be right on the screen.
Right, that's
or at
great.
least that's how I picture it being in my head. So.
Balloons going off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Time for a party.
confetti. And it will show whether they're in a terminated status or not. Because again, they may be vested, they may not, they may have quit 5 months ago, but our system doesn't really change them to terminated status until 6 months, but we don't really need to explain all that to people. So it'll just show what their status is, terminated or active. And then that will then determine how the process goes for them and whether their employer has to certify their termination or not.
Might want to have a conversation about that actual term, because if somebody quits and then it's listed, you were terminated.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
That's really a negative connotation for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
I think my notes about that actually talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah. I
So-
think it's active or not.
That's way better.
Darla, in all seriousness, you may have said this, but is there a way to maybe give them notification on the system itself when they're 6 months or a year away from being vested, that maybe now is the time for them to start inquiring as to their options, or?
Well,
some-
they can't really do anything until
Unless they
retire.
are.
Well, if they're vested, I mean, vesting is an important milestone, but if they're still working, there's nothing.
Right, there's no point.
Right, because you might be in your mid to late
Right.
20s when you vest, and
Right.
you're not even
It's
thinking that.
irrelevant. Okay.
Yeah. But it is, especially for these who want to withdraw, that is going to be really important.
Plenty of people who come from other places, when they're vested, they can do something with money from elsewhere and things
Right.
like that.
Right. Right, and whether they can do a service purchase.
Exactly.
So it is important information. It's not that it was not available to them, it's just that we just showed their creditable service balance without any flag of any kind that, oh, and by the way, this means you're vested. It was just, you have 5.17 years, or whatever it is. So it was always out there, it just wasn't made obvious, so. But it will help with this withdrawal process as well. Let's see. So, on the second page of this, maintaining existing forms and documents is a really big part of my job, and that takes up, that keeps me very busy. In fact, Denise mentioned the ADA compliant request we received. One was just, not yesterday, day before yesterday, a one-page form that someone had run through an ADA compliance checker, and it failed, of course, because we have our logo and graphics, and we try to put as much information on the form as we can. That does not work for a screen reader, so it took me about 3 hours to change a one-page form into something that a screen reader could read. So it's all necessary, it's just very time-consuming stuff. That's one of those things where we just sort of cross our fingers and hope that
Yeah, if you've never lived through that, it's hard to explain. It's miserable.
it's extremely detailed about what those software applications look for. So it's good, it's a good exercise. I hadn't done it. I worked in a health insurance company many years ago, and that was a big part of my job there, but I really haven't had as much involvement with it here, so. So one of the things I wanted to mention is that a lot of these things they're not just me doing them, I'm just doing the actual, like this, and drawing the pictures. But Denise and Tammy and I have been working a lot on revamping a lot of the standard correspondence that goes out. And Tammy is the keeper of the actual templates that are in M-Trust that they can use. So they're standard letters, the language is all predefined for the most part. There are some variable things, but for like the R&D processes and other important changes, this process of getting withdrawal applications out to all these dormant members and non-vested members, there was just a lot of correspondence that had to be revamped. So Denise has all the heavy lifting of looking at the content and figuring out what do they comport with statute. Are there any legal problems with it? What do we have to tell them in a letter? And then Tammy, of course, knows about, well, at this point in their career, they would have gotten a letter that said this. Later, so without going into all the detail, this is just a great example of, again, I'm going to hold up a copy. This was the reinstatement of benefits. Someone who had retired and then went back to work, working under a second benefit, and then now is re-retiring and wanting to start their retirement benefit again. The letter before was almost 4 pages of very dense information, including a lot of references to statute, about what happens if they go back to work. Well, these are people who had gone back to work, and now they're not, it was just a lot of information they didn't need. So Denise cut out a lot of it, and we ended up getting it to one little page, like this with bullets.
Awesome.
So I'm weird that way, but to me that stuff's fun. So Denise has the hard work about, is it accurate, and do we?
No, Darla has the hard work, really.
Oh,
People are
it's
way more
so
likely to read
appreciated
one
by
page.
members.
Right. There's nothing that drives me more crazy than a 4-page letter that tells you what you need to do on the second to last paragraph.
Right.
So, and that's nobody's fault here, it's just there was just a lot of information to be shared, and every so often it's a good practice to start going through these. And usually it's it's the IRS rule change or something that triggers it, but we've had a lot of fun, and there's a lot more to do, like revising all the letters that go with the application process. We got through like disability ones, and there's just a lot more to do.
I'm glad you're having fun.
It is kind of fun. I know, it's a weird thing
If
to
it
say,
wasn't,
but-
you're in the wrong job.
Yeah, right. It's one of those things where you see people's eyes start to spiral, like, I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be me.
And even if it isn't fun, it's incredibly satisfying.
It is, it really is.
You get that final copy and you're like, wow.
And I hear, I helped with the big letter, I think it's 12 pages with the withdrawal application that went to all these members that we hadn't been in contact with for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And I hear the phone calls, because I'm right across from Nolan and his staff, and people will say, what do I need to do? And they would say, well, read the letter.
Exactly, I know it's
Fill out that application that's in the letter, but people just want to have,
Yeah.
because like you said, a lot of people forget they even, they forgot they even had money here, so how we write those letters is important, and it's kind of fun. There's so many of them, but we're chipping away at big chunks of them, so that's kind of fun. And I enjoy that collaborative kind of work. So then the other thing is that I think you've all seen this before, and this was prompted by Carrie, which I really loved. It's been changed since the first time I emailed it. We took out some of the unnecessary detail, so that's in your packet. So we'll just start using that unless anyone has any serious concerns about it.
Yeah, let me know when it's ready to be shared too, because I know that.
Okay.
I mean, it's just people ask you, and
Right.
and it was fun to work with. I said, these are the things I'm thinking when people ask me silly questions, but not silly questions. When people ask me questions.
Yes.
Hard
Hard questions.
But I don't know how to put all of this together, and I also don't want to be the one putting it in writing, because it's not from me. Yeah, this is what Carrie told me. I'm sorry, no, I didn't.
Oh, we've heard
Yes, I
that
did,
before.
yeah.
Jeff told me that. I said, "Yeah, I don't think so."
I really like the bottom line, that, that was just so succinct. We've been here for a long time, and it's just this modest thing
Right.
for you.
Good. And I know, like, the staff person asked you the question, they don't want to know about actuarially sound. That's
She's
great.
like, that's over my
She
head.
actually said, that's great to me.
Yeah.
And I understand. But to me, I felt like, and I hope you agree, that it was just important for people to know that there are smart people working on it behind the scenes. It's not just this nebulous gray thing that might explode tomorrow. It's constantly being looked at. So that was sort of my goal there. Let's
Thank
see.
you, that was awesome.
Oh, good. Let's see, the TRS 101 video, which was recorded from our virtual Zoom sessions last year, and the Ready Set Retire. At the time I wrote the summary, it was not quite 200 times for the TRS 101 presentation and about 160 views. And those are, it was 212 yesterday for TRS 101, and 178 for Ready Set Retire. So they do get used a lot, and I know you do promote that among your newer staff. We do have 24 YouTube channel subscribers, which always amazes me. 300 some on Facebook. I was just going to put a little teacher appreciation week thing on there today after the meeting. Yeah.
There's one word in here that I just saw at the very end. I'm just wondering about it. It seems like a very minor thing, but the bottom line, TRS continues to do what it's done successfully since 1937, pay a modest but reliable income. I'm wondering if a modest is more information than we need, because for some people, their attitude may be that it's not modest, that it's perfectly sufficient. It seems kind of, I know it's a small point, but it seems like it's making a judgment as to whether or not a teacher's lifetime work effort is modest by comparison to anybody else or not.
Right.
I'm just not sure it's necessary.
I think, just to give the perspective on why it's there, is that teachers aren't getting rich off their retirement.
No doubt.
It's only a piece, it's the three-legged stool concept.
Okay.
So I think that was my motivation for saying that this is not meant to replace your entire income. It's
Okay.
gonna just give you a piece of what you need for retirement, so I don't know if that
You know,
changes.
it's interesting perspectives. I read that and I thought, well, this is what we need to give to the legislators. A modest, reliable.
Yeah.
So I thought it, in that perspective, sounded perfect to me.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think you're right, no one looks at teachers like, well, you don't make much anyway, so you.
Right.
Yeah, that was not at all the intent. No. Okay, let's see, legislative wrap-up, I'm drafting content for the newsletter. This is the one from last year, and I, of course, thank you for the photo again. I have learned that members love photos. When we did the Christmas, the staff picture, we got more comments on that. And this, I just had to show this because it was so cute. This retiree wrote this letter, actually wrote a letter after this newsletter. Which, who does that anymore? It's just so nice.
Teachers.
Yeah.
That's funny you say that. The last board meeting we had, Sean gave me a handwritten letter from some parents of a student I had who also were in the system,
Oh,
which was really nice.
yeah.
I'd put odds on the fact that that person is north of 60.
Oh, yes. I retired in 1987 at 35 years,
Yep.
so, wow. So I have this on my little bulletin board, and I think the next one, when I publish it, I'm gonna mail in a little letter back. Just 'cause it was nice. So that issue is about the survey, and I think they like that. What else? Upcoming outreach activities. We'll participate with Sarah again on all the workshops. We were just talking about that during the break. Whether we do virtual or in person or a combination, we're not sure for those fall workshops. So lots of stuff going on all the time. I don't know if any of you have any suggestions or concerns or.
Seems like it's getting back to normal, but then again, you read about Washington or something and you're like, maybe we won't be back to normal. I don't know.
Well, thanks again for the photo.
Thank you.
Are you all okay with me putting that photo in the newsletter?
Are you gonna Photoshop it and make sure we all look really good?
Really stand and just.
Shiny.
Take the shine off.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, the stars are all Photoshopped, so why not?
Yeah. I'm not very good at Photoshop.
So maybe you should leave it then.
Well, thank you.
She'd just switch our heads on the bodies.
Before Darla leaves, I just
Darla.
want to make a comment. When I came on the board, and I know you were here for a long time too, one of probably the best directives that came from the board was to address communications. And we went for years asking for a way to work into a scenario where we improved communications across the board. And we've had good people work in that position, but I really believe you've taken that above and beyond what we expected.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Speaking of other quality employees, where's Tammy today?
She's online, she's
Oh,
joining.
hi, Tammy.
Yeah.
Remote. She'll be giving you the disability.
Hi.
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I would like to make a comment in regards to the work that has been done on the correspondence, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So thank you much. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Denise and Darla for the work that the three of us collaborating together to work on an updated correspondence. A huge thank you to both of them for the work that was done on the R&D process. My vision of wanting it to be a truly predominantly automated process was a huge effort on their part as well. And especially Darla took the special tax notice and the new created withdrawal form for that process and made it to, because I was hoping to be able to have the correspondence be able to be sent to print mail services and mailed directly from print mail services instead of staff having to have the correspondence sent back to TRS, us stuffing applications and then mailing the letters out. That was a huge undertaking, and it is a 12-page letter. And of course, this year, as Nolan had and Sean both mentioned earlier, we've been sending out thousands of letters, and that's made a huge difference for staff, workload, that print and mail services has been able to handle that. And I know Fort Nolan's group is taking the brunt of that right now, and especially this year with the added increase of all the dormant records that are being handled in this mailing this year. But a huge thanks to Donna and Denise for what they've done to help make that process truly a more predominant automated process. So thank you.
Thank you for all your work, you guys. We really do appreciate it. Right. So we are on to just the application and benefit adjustments, Tammy. Yeah. Looks like we've got a form here and.
Madam Chair,
You're good.
okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, as you can see, we processed 74 applications since the last time the board met. It's just an indication of that summer is approaching, and of course in August when we meet again, there will be a significant increase in the number of retirement applications. I know we mailed out close to 400 regular retirement apps and close to 300 terminated vested applications, so I anticipate seeing a significant increase for June, July this year in retirement. But for now, we're steadily increasing since our last meeting to today. Any questions?
Nope. Nope. All right, so now we better close the meeting for our disability applications. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. Yes, I did. I put a little mark around it too. Long-range planning, sorry. We're not closing the meeting.
Not quite. So, Madam Chair, members of the board, I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this. One thing I would want to point out for the whole board, I think I talked just briefly when we did the budget analysis earlier. We are in the second year of our current strategic plan, so we will have Jim Cairns come in and facilitate updating our next 2-year strategic plan at our August meeting. And part of that as well, I think we will have Tammy give a presentation on some of the recent developments that have been incorporated into M-Trust since the last formal phase of the project was put into place, so that you have an idea of the type of improvements that we've been able to accomplish since that point in time. And then we need to have a discussion of what does the future look like as far as how many resources do we want to continue to put into M-Trust, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. And we have a pretty good plan of the things we want to do. We have a really good plan of things we want to do in the upcoming year as well as the year following. And I'll just briefly mention online withdrawals is a for sure thing that's going to come to fruition here in the next year. We want that to be in place for some period of time, 3 to 6 months, before we even start doing requirements on an online retirement application, just so we can incorporate all the lessons learned. I mean, there's going to be things that come about that we just don't even know what they are yet. But we want to make sure we incorporate everything we learned from that into the online retirement application. And then beyond that, I think that's something that we really need to address in strategic planning, is what level of annual commitment is reasonable and necessary to maintain M-Trust for the long haul. We've sort of been in a constant build-out phase really since I got here. So we haven't got to the point yet where we're just really maintenance plus maybe a little bit, but we're starting to get to where we at least need to think about that and have a plan for that. So that'll be a big piece of our strategic planning session this upcoming August. The current plan, the commitment worksheet, I did update a few things in red font, not a lot. The online withdrawal will be implemented this upcoming year, fiscal year, so I think implementation on that, I believe, is around December. Is that right, Tammy? I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head.
Correct, yes. We're looking at the end of the year for implementation of OWA.
Okay, thank you. And then some of these other things, so, you know, the next one on that page where the outcome is improved internal documentation and business processes related to, you know, we haven't, I say not started because we have not engaged additional technical writers to job shadow and prepare documentation. There really was no means to do that in the past year with COVID. But with all of that said, we are making strides. I mean, Darla just spoke to a lot of the things that we are doing with existing staff, Darla being one of them, where we are improving our documentation and business processes. So it's not like we're not doing anything at all in this area. We just haven't, you know, taken the step to hire contractors to job shadow because there was no one here to shadow with. So
Would have been an easy job.
yeah, right.
Go with the
Or really
their
hard.
houses.
Yeah, or really hard.
Wouldn't have had quality outcomes.
No. So, but we are, I think, actually making success in that area, or making improvements in that area. We're just not using contractors to get it done yet. Obviously, we already approved in the budget the hire of an internal auditor. That's been a strategic planning item for some time, and we are going to make that happen probably in the August timeframe with your approval of the budget, which you've already done. Then there are really no other updates until you get to the bottom line there. I just updated the communication and outreach, updated employer resources, improvement in timely communication. That's really an ongoing thing, and Darla already spoke to some of the current NASBO training that they've been participating in.
Sean, I have a question.
Yes.
Due to COVID and what has occurred in this last year with lots of big employers having lots of their employees working at home and now looking at an eventual outcome where the crisis is behind us, but some of those behaviors may remain implemented for the flexibility of the work environment, and in some cases even augmented efficiencies. Have we considered in the strategic planning any potential implementation of such solutions for the staff here?
So, Madam Chair and Member Chamberlain, we have not in this strategic plan. I mean, there's not a specific item in here. TRS does have a telework policy that we have utilized in the past, and it is still a current policy. Prior to the COVID outbreak, we didn't have anyone working under that policy. So I guess the short answer is no. We really haven't yet, and I don't know what that looks like going forward. Like I shared with you earlier today, I've sort of taken the approach as we're transitioning back, and so back in April, I had staff, because we had some staff that were only maybe coming in for a half hour a day, and they were, you know, just to drop some forms off, pick some forms up, and they were out of here. And all the doors to the office were locked, and so we weren't open for walk-in business, really. I mean, we still would, if somebody showed up at the door, we would help them. But we've already started to transition to where we're at least available and ready to help our customers if they do show up. And one of the areas I can guarantee you, the expectation is going to be there for us to continue to meet face-to-face, one-on-one with retirees is in the benefit officer group. That's a big portion of their job, is they'll have 3 to 4 in-person meetings to go over estimate of benefits and retirement application options with members, really from last month all the way up and through the summer. I mean, that's the busiest time of year for them. And we're already getting calls asking, hey, can we come meet with you? And the response is, you know, we're meeting with walk-ins, you know, to help them finish whatever little bit they're at. Otherwise, we're trying to schedule those currently as either a Teams meeting or over the phone meeting. But I know the expectation is there that our members want to be able to do that. Our staff, our benefit officers, they all tell me that is probably the favorite part of their job. Mm-hmm. So certain positions, there's just no way you can do that from home.
Right, I'm certain that's true.
There are some that potentially you could do some portion of it from home, but you know, we haven't made those evaluations.
I guess the reason I'm thinking about it is for the very long term, you know, to stay, for example, in this office as staffing needs increase, total number of members increase. At least now it provides an additional optional opportunity potentially for the expansion of work-related scenarios.
It does, yes.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of information that will come out in research with all these other companies as to efficiencies of different kinds of functions. There's some people that are claiming that they're ready to go back to work just because they miss the social environment and it makes them more productive. Other people have exactly the opposite attitude. So just curious how that was playing out for you.
Right, and the one thing I would add, so in the transition, I mean, there has been a little bit of pushback, and every department, in one way or another, whether it be retired payroll, accounting, active, membership, those three make up the bulk of the staff. They all have a customer-facing responsibility. When a member comes in with a withdrawal form they have questions on and they need to see, that's the accounting. They're the ones that process those, they're the ones that approve those. Obviously, retired payroll, once they're seeking a benefit, whether they're the member or beneficiary, all those changes, those are handled by the retired payroll department. And then I already spoke to the active group, the benefit officers meeting with prospective retirees. So we have to have coverage in those areas.
Right.
Now, is there some additional flexibility that can be given? Likely, but we haven't really delved into that much at this point.
Well, there could be some big downsides. So for example, if you let John work at home and he's in his garage looking at his motorcycle saying, should I work or should I go for a ride on that bike? That could be a real downside.
So John is in the office 5 days a week, just for that reason. No.
But I would like us to investigate Member Chamberlain's suggestion. Now that he brought it up.
So, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to come out of this whole experience for everyone, and it may result in some changes.
It is interesting too, the longer you're out, the harder it is to come back to. And I know that, like, just even in our own situations and the different teachers we've been dealing with, and, there's more anxiety to come back, but we just came back, so it's like, just deal with it. So.
I think it's even harder for the private side of things that have maybe not had employees for a year.
Right.
To get people excited about coming back and being a part of it.
Yep.
And I have one quick question on the augments to interest that are planned here. Are those accounted for in the budget under the 12 grand a month to Alfred, or is there a phase 4 included in this, or what? How do we pay for those, and how do we budget for those charges?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good question. Let me just get back to the budget. I can show you. So the $12,000 per month, which is our maintenance, that pays for any fixes to essentially current code that's in the system, plus a little bit. Like we don't have to do what we call a PCR, a project change, or I don't know exactly what the acronym is, like project change requirement. We don't do one of them for everything. Alfred and Roy they have kind of an amount of time in addition to, how do I say this? They have an amount of time per month essentially that they're willing to provide to us now, whether that's to fix a bug for something they built 3 years ago or something that comes up brand new, is and anything that requires, we know, major programming like online withdrawals, we do it as a PCR and we lay out all the requirements ahead of time. They give us a bid, we decide yes or no, or maybe do we need to scale the scope back, can we expand the scope, all those kinds of things. We sign off on those.
Do those costs then need to be amortized, or can that be expensed if it's a?
We're just expending. So once we finish phase 3, so the current year, everything we're doing in the current year, we're just expending as part of our operating budget, and that's what we're proposing for the upcoming year as well.
Okay.
And that, there's a couple of things with that. We're at a point now, if you look at page 28 of your packet, behind tab 4, you see the $144,000 annual fixed fee for Alfred and Monsgarden Associates. And then you see the Rising Star Inc. for $120,000. That's the project management and test lead services. And then the $95,000 for interest enhancements. that's what's on top of the maintenance for the additional development we want to do in the upcoming year.
Okay. That makes sense.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes.
And that's what I sort of mentioned at the beginning of the strategic planning section is, that's the piece of things that I think we need to look at, you know, a little more in depth in August as what is our long-term vision of, you know, what's a reasonable amount to budget every year for additional enhancements. And one of the things we are going to do in this upcoming year is work closely, as part of our project plan for the upcoming year, is for Monica, who's our test lead and project manager. She's going to spend time, devote time to transitioning some of the things she's doing to existing TRS staff, so we can, while we still have her on contract, because she's going to need to help us a lot, but we're working towards transitioning a lot of those duties to existing staff, so at some point, whether it's 2 years from now or 4 years from now, we don't have a contractor hired for those project management and test lead services.
Okay.
PCR's project change request, I don't know why I didn't think of that.
All right.
Any other questions on the strategic plan? Okay.
This is another time for public comment, if any of there are things. All right, so yes, now we do need to close the meeting for some disability applications we have to address. I'll just keep these. All right, I think the meeting is called back to order. We need to vote.
Sorry, John, are we recording? Yes, we're good.
We need to vote on 3 disability requests. Can I have a motion for Patricia S. Ward?
I move to approve.
My second.
Okay. Is it any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? We also, give them all to you. We also need a motion for the disability request of Connie Mine.
I move to approve.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? Okay, and then finally, the disability request for David Classy.
I would make a motion to approve.
I'll
Second.
second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, or chair votes aye? Any opposed? All right, all 3 disability requests have been approved. All right. This is almost time for adjournment, but we have a plaque to give to Janice.
Oh, that's so
And
nice.
Janice has been a part of the board since 2013. Janice, it's been an honor to work with you. We've gotten to travel together, we've gotten to know each other. Your intelligence, your compassion, everything about you has just been delightful to work with, and I'm gonna miss you. I wish you could stay. So
I second that motion.
Well, thank you, that is so
this
sweet.
is really great, so.
That's beautiful, and it's been my honor to be on this board. I have learned so much and met so many fabulous people, so, thank you.
You're not just, she's done a million things with the union and with all kinds of things. I mean, we've made a difference. So on behalf of all teachers, thank you. Thank you. All right, well, let's have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
All right.